What's up, guys? So the strategic Bitcoin reserve has been announced. So this is an emergency video. Let's talk about it. The strategic Bitcoin reserve has been announced, and what are the positives and the negatives? Here are my thoughts, and what could actually entail, and what does it really mean for everyone. So I made a video just before this one called "Create Your Own Bitcoin Strategic Reserve." You should just do that. I mean, this is the most important thing you should do. But since this is the talk of the town right now, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what does it mean for the government to adopt a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and what does it mean for this government in this specific executive order, and what does it entail, and for me, what I think could be the best outcome out of it. Let's start. So first of all, President Trump signed an executive order saying that the US government now has a Bitcoin strategic reserve as well as a digital assets stockpile. So he made the separation. This is the first positive about this executive order, about this strategic reserve, is that it's actually a Bitcoin strategic reserve, while the rest is just like separated into like an investment stockpile. Another thing about this strategic reserve is that they're not actually going to buy it. I mean, so far, what the executive order says, maybe it could change, maybe something could happen that could trigger something else. But for so far, they will not buy any additional Bitcoin. And this is probably why the market is not reacting as we all thought it would. It's not going to buy any new Bitcoin. They have already like around 200,000 Bitcoin that we talked about in the past, which are seized from supposed criminal activities or hacks that happened in the past. They were seized by the US government and they were just sitting there as seized assets. In the past, the previous administration did sell some of this Bitcoin. So this Bitcoin that was seized was up to trade. You can sell it, you can do whatever with it. You can just return it maybe to certain people who were victim of certain criminal activities. What we know so far is that they sold some of it. With this executive order and this strategic Bitcoin reserve, they will move these seized Bitcoin into a strategic reserve, and apparently it entails that they will not sell it anymore. When the video of Trump signing the executive order, there was a guy talking to him. I believe it's the crypto czar. It's called David Sachs. I believe he was the one talking to him. He said that in the past, the previous administrations made a mistake by selling the Bitcoin, and they cost the taxpayer like 18 billion, 17 billion dollars when they sold this. Yeah, I mean, it's not really costing anyone anything because this is not your money, it's not your Bitcoin, it's not the taxpayers' Bitcoin, it's just the government's Bitcoin. But putting that aside, this is what it means. It means that when this Bitcoin is moved from being as a seized Bitcoin, it has been moved to a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And for the other digital assets, they're not called strategic digital assets or crypto reserves, they're just a stockpile. So also, they will not be bought. These are just assets or cryptocurrencies that were also seized during criminal activities or hacked. And they will be put in a different nomination, different term as a crypto stockpile or digital asset. This is the word the government is using, digital asset stockpile. So if we put all this political, governmental jargon aside, what does it really mean? It really just means that the Bitcoin that the government had and was controlling basically, or is controlling, they will not sell it anymore. So a Bitcoin strategic reserve in that context, in this executive order, it simply means that the government will no longer sell the Bitcoin. Call it whatever you want, strategic or non-strategic, because this word has been thrown around and it's being used as the executive order, even though I wouldn't necessarily compare it to the commodities used as a strategic reserve, because those serve a completely different purpose, and I talked about that in my previous video and my newsletter. If you're not subscribed, please do. Or you can check that newsletter in the description below. You can check all my posts on my Substack. Basically, I talked about how this is not really comparable to an oil reserve or a grain reserve or whatever other reserves the government usually holds. But this is what they're calling it. And if we want to just simplify it for now, it's just the government not selling the Bitcoin for the ones that they already have. It doesn't say anything about buying more Bitcoin for now. And that's it. Now, it was done through an executive order. As far as I understand, if we have a new administration that is anti-crypto, anti-Bitcoin, let's say the next administration after Trump, the Democrats win, for example, and they're anti-Bitcoin, even if some Republican wins and he is anti-crypto, he can reverse it by just another executive order. I don't believe that will happen, but I'm just saying it could happen because for me, like after what we saw in these elections, I don't believe there's going to be a new candidate that will have a chance to win if they take a stance against Bitcoin and crypto, because it proved that this is what it was a losing strategy for the Democrats for the last 5 years. And when they campaigned, they kind of campaigned. They don't really go out and said we're anti-crypto, but at the same time they weren't pro-crypto. And so I don't believe a new president, at least for the foreseeable future, we will see a new president that will be anti-crypto and he will reverse this executive order. So why this is good? I guess this is good for the market in the sense that we will not have like selling pressure from a big government like the one we saw last year in mid-2024 when we saw the German government just dumping around 50,000 coins, something like that. And it just put a lot of selling pressure on the market. Now the US government has 200,000 Bitcoin. And if they were going to do that, it would have been kind of like negative for the market, at least on the short to medium run. This is what I believe it could have been the case. Even though for me, like the less the government owns Bitcoin, the better. So I know like everyone who is pro strategic Bitcoin reserve, it has been like advertising for it as it's like this is something great for the US economy and it's like the Renaissance or whatever. But I'm not really convinced. I've never heard an argument how this Bitcoin strategic reserve can actually be beneficial for the average American. Again, I'm happy to understand how that could be the case. I know that Michael Saylor just loves to compare it to when the US bought Louisiana and like Manhattan and Alaska. But that's not really comparable because actual Americans live on this land and they are allowed and they have the right to own property there and they are allowed to do business and they are allowed to extract the resources of those land. So they are actually benefiting from it as Americans, not just the government who is taxing those Americans. The people who live on this land, they can actually benefit from it instead of just giving it to a different population, a different country. They're actually benefiting from it by owning it and producing stuff on it and running businesses and everything like that. This comparison cannot be really made with Bitcoin. So this is how, I guess, Saylor tries to paint it, but again, I'm not really convinced. Others try to paint it as same way you talk about the oil reserve or the grain reserve. Again, it doesn't really make sense for reasons I talked about in a previous video. I'm not going to go into it again. But for me, what could really this strategic Bitcoin, like this just came up to me and I kind of feel like this is the only way the strategic Bitcoin reserve could be beneficial for the US and the whole world and like regular citizens. If the Trump and the administration go out and says, okay, we have a Bitcoin strategic reserve and we're just gonna keep buying and buying forever. This message, if they will ever do that, if they will ever be able to do that, this will lay out a message that the government does not really trust the US dollar. So the issuers basically of the US dollar, the currency, they don't trust it anymore. They want to put their savings in Bitcoin and they want to basically sell the US dollar to buy Bitcoin. So this kind of message, if they were able to do that and they have this capacity to do it, this kind of message will be a speculative attack on the Federal Reserve. So we know that in the US government, the government and the Federal Reserve, legally speaking or technically speaking, they are separate. The Federal Reserve is like an independent entity from the government, although technically or like practically speaking, they're not. But if the government decides they want to do that, they have to go to the Federal Reserve and ask for money to do that. Now, they can do other things such as selling the gold or selling other government property and buy Bitcoin. In that scenario, it's not really a speculative attack against the dollar. The only speculative attack against the dollar would be if they go and take loans from the Federal Reserve. They take the money that the Federal Reserve is able to print and they go and buy Bitcoin with that. That would be an incredible speculative attack on the US dollar. We cannot really compare this to what MetaPlanet and MicroStrategy and all these guys are doing, because what these guys are doing is that they're selling shares, which they can produce as much as they want of, and they're stacking Bitcoin with that. But when you are an owner of a share of a company, you exactly own the company, meaning you have access to the company's assets. So your share in the company goes up based on the assets that you have, depending on how you measure the company and what kind of business model the company has. But specifically for these companies, the more Bitcoin they have, meaning the more they can raise money to buy Bitcoin from issuance of shares, the more the share will go up as Bitcoin price goes up and as their Bitcoin stack goes up. Now, when it comes to the government, it's not really the same, because if you own a US dollar, you cannot really exchange it to Bitcoin. Or if you own a government bond, which is like the equivalent of like a convertible bond or any bond used in equity, you cannot really convert that bond into like government shares and have access to those Bitcoin. So if the government decides to start buying Bitcoin, if the Trump administration starts to do that, using freshly printed US dollars, they get access to it from the Federal Reserve, which I believe is kind of a stretch, and I don't think they will be able to do that exactly. But let's say they do that. This would be a speculative attack against the Federal Reserve, against the US dollar system, and against the government bond system. So this is probably the best outcome that could come out of this strategic reserve. That's just in my opinion. Now, do I believe it will happen? I'm not really sure. I don't think so. I would give it like a 30 to 40% chance it could happen after everything we saw. If you had asked me like a few months ago, I would say like it's probably like a 5% chance. If you had asked me like a year ago, I would say like it's a 1% chance. So I guess like the odds are growing for me, and it could happen. But so far, this is what we have: 200,000, around 200,000 Bitcoin that will be held with the government as a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What do you think of this announcement? Let me know what you expect. What will you expect to happen? What outcomes could come out of this strategic Bitcoin reserve? And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you all for being here. If you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe to this video, share with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.